Okay, so you finally scored your first newspaper interview and you're a little unsure what to do. I know the first time you sit down with a newspaper reporter, it can feel like you're being interrogated.
What are your views on Social Security?
Most of the time, regardless of how nervous you are, your first interview with a local reporter is going to go well. There are some basic do's and don'ts when having your first interview with a newspaper reporter. Well, any interview with any reporter, but newspapers deserve their own video because they're different than TV interviews. Every candidate is going to be interviewed by the newspaper at least once throughout the course of the campaign. And this happens because even without any effort on your own, the newspaper will want to do a review of the local candidates. And that's a good thing. It's a great opportunity for your name to be seen and what you have to say to be shown to the people in your local community. Now, reporters tend to get a bad name. And it's not like they're all innocent, but on the national level at MSNBC, the New York Times, and others, they're very dishonest. But that doesn't mean that your local reporter is going to be dishonest as well. It's important to keep in mind that the Fourth Estate, as we know it today, as being the harbingers of truth, is a relatively new phenomenon. Even when America was just a new nation, the Federalists had their papers and the Whigs had theirs, and they both printed nothing but half information and lies. So us seeing the news media as a group that can provide us with valuable information that is neutral and important and informing our citizens is still a new and evolving process. It has by no means been perfected, as we can see by the news media outlets we have today. So, don't take any preconceived notions of distrust and aggression with you when dealing with your local newspaper reporter, even in a large metropolitan area, because you can go and read what that reporter had to say and know in advance the kind of reporter that they are, how they ask questions, what their interests are, and how they push the needle when they're talking to a political candidate. There are some basic do's and don'ts when you're going to be in a newspaper interview. Rule number 1. Don't lie. Reporters can smell a lie a mile away. They're like sharks. They can sense it. It's in their DNA. And as a candidate, you never have a reason to lie. Most candidates usually lie about things they never needed to lie out to begin with. If you're not ready to answer a question, and it's a tough question, 1, you should have been prepared. Secondly, you can say, this is an evolving situation. I'm not really sure what's happening. I need to have all the information before I give you an answer. I'd like to follow up with you later. Cool. If it's your thoughts on a current situation. If it's because you were in a car accident because you were drinking and you killed Bambi, well, you should have had an answer for that in case it come up before you got there. Rule number 2, don't flirt with the reporter. Reporters are pretty cool people. It's their job to get people to talk. They're a lot like politicians. When we work in politics, it's the people business. We have to like people. We have to like talking to people. We have to like being around people. And reporters are much the same way. So don't flirt with the reporter. And I only mention this because I've actually had it happen with the candidate. You would think they have more seats, but you guys know, never turn to your consultants and say, Rich, what am I supposed to say to this question in the middle of an interview? It's easy to get nervous in an interview. This has actually happened on multiple occasions. Your consultant, your communications director, or your campaign manager is simply there as an observer. I tape record interviews when I'm there with my candidates, not because I'm suspicious of the journalist, but so that we can practice those kinds of questions later on. It's just a process of helping you get better at answering questions by doing a review of how you handled your last interview. Number 4, don't be late for a newspaper interview. In fact, you shouldn't be late at all. Politicians on the campaign trail get in a habit of being late, and this has become a trend among some of our people. When Trump was traveling or Obama was traveling, we had a situation where they've got hundreds of Secret Service agents and they got to clear airfields. Sometimes the guys are going to run behind when they have 10 campaign stops. If you've got a car and you're just in a congressional district or a state legislative district, you got to make sure that you're going to be on time to your meetings. I've done advance work and I've driven candidates. You can be on time. most of the time. But reporters are professionals. They don't have to interview you. They could just write a story talking about how you're evil and your mom's a whore and anything else they want, instead of meeting with you. But most of the time they do actually want to talk to you, and you should be on time. And I've never, ever had a reporter be late for an interview, ever. The most important rule is try not to be nervous. When you get nervous and the adrenaline is running and you've not done a lot of these before, or the interview is going to be an interrogation, it can be easy to get a little nervous. But that's why we practice. If you don't have somebody to practice with, then find someone to practice with. Review previous publications that the journalist has written where they've obviously asked the candidate questions, and you can assess how those interviews are going to go and the kinds of questions that are going to be asked. It just takes a little bit of time, and you can be ready for your interview. So don't be too nervous. I've noticed nervous candidates are more likely to go off script, and they're much more likely to make big mistakes or say too much. The only thing worse than saying too little is to say too much. You don't want to say fewer than 10 words. You want to say 10 to 20 words for your answers. How those words are conveyed could have an effect on how you deliver your message. Now, there's a list of do's that are very important. Number one, be honest. If you're sitting down with a reporter, they ask you a question, you should have been already prepared for almost everything they're going to ask you, but you won't be 100% prepared. So by default, if you don't know what to say, just be honest and give context. A quote will be pulled out of it if it's not a prepared quote, out of a paragraph that you say. And it's kind of up in the air how it's actually going to be reported, but by default, being honest is probably the best way to go. Most candidates aren't involved in situations that are complicated. I know I've probably made some jokes in my videos about these terrible candidates, but 99% of the time we got good people with good backgrounds. So we don't have a Mexican nanny suing them because they're pregnant, right? That doesn't happen very often. Relax. I think I said in the don'ts, don't be nervous, but now you just want to relax. Something that I think is very helpful is before walking into an interview, sit in your car for a minute, relax for 5 to 10 minutes, find your peace. I've got candidates that sometimes they pray or just sit in a moment of silence before engaging. That can be helpful, and that's good advice for anywhere on the campaign trail. You got to be in a cool, focused place before you engage. Always tape record the interview. That's the third thing we got to put on our list of do's. Always tape record the interview. And it's not 20 years ago when I really got started. It wasn't necessarily, we didn't necessarily record the interviews then as we probably should have. I have had some candidates that were misquoted and the reporter's like, well, I got a recording of what he said. And I'm just like, we were sitting right there. And we know they didn't say that, but I didn't have the recording. That's my fault. So just in case somebody has forgotten, it's easy to put an app on your phone. I've got one on mine to record interviews. Make sure that you always tape record the interview, not just because of that, because that's really a lot less common now with common technology and everybody recording their interviews, but also so that you can go back and say, how could I have answered this question better? Because I stumbled, I stuttered, I got nervous. Number 4 on your do's is you want to give clean, simple, and direct answers. It's sometimes not always easy because you don't always know the kinds of questions that are going to be asked, but in general, if you have put together your issues, you've put together your ideas, you know what you want to say, you've got your short answers, you have an overall overarching view of government and your view of it, you can be prepared for anything just by being prepared for the campaign overall. So if they ask you your opinion on a hypothetical, what would you do if your daughter was raped? Well, that's a frightening scenario that every parent is concerned about, and I can understand why the voters would be interested in my opinion of something like that, right? Obviously, the reporter's being a little bit catty there because you've taken a pro-life position, they're pro-choice, and they're, what if it's your daughter? I think one of the worst examples of this was probably recently. We had a 13-year-old girl in Ohio. I think she was 10 or 13. She gets raped, she gets pregnant, and we're watching a state legislator trying to defend why this girl who'd been raped isn't allowed to have an abortion, right? It's a terrible place to be, but she stuck to her guns and she gave her opinion and she was consistent with her beliefs, and that was a great approach. But what highlights the media is that they didn't mention anywhere in the news that the man who raped this girl was an illegal immigrant who'd already been arrested and through catch and release had been let go. Right? So how did Tim Ryan, for example, the senator who voted on that bill to let these criminals go, respond to that in the debates? And he actually had kind of a deer caught in the headlights kind of a moment in the debate against J.D. Vance when that came up. His people should have prepared for him to defend that position, but he basically came out looking like a monster, which it's hard not to look like one when that's your philosophy, but usually I don't know what to say about it. Always be polite. Every now and again, even if the reporter gives you attitude or they challenge something that you said, you still need to be cool and be polite. More than once I've had candidates like, "Who do you think you are?" Like, okay, you can't do that. The article didn't really do well after that. And so you got to maintain your cool. You gotta relax. People are gonna come at you, and you can't punch everybody in the face who looks at you badly, even if you want to. That's just a rule of life. Reporters are gonna come after you and ask you tough questions, and you've got to be ready and you got to be cool, because if you have a good answer, it's like, whoa, maybe they'll skip it. Actually, most of the time when I've had candidates give really good answers to catty questions like that, the reporter didn't even bother putting it in the paper, the question or their answer, because it didn't fit the narrative that they wanted to write, and they couldn't catch them up. Something that is very important, I think, is be willing to say, "I don't know." I know that goes against everything in media training that anybody ever learns. I know mine says never say "I don't know," but it's better to say you don't know than to say something stupid, right? And that's what happens. If you don't know, then you have to give another answer, right? You have to say that this is an issue I haven't studied. That's a really good question. I wish I had more information about it. Can I get back with you? So it's better to do that than to say something never answer something flying off the seat of your pants. All your answers should have been, and on every topic, should have been well thought out and prepared. Even if you talk about them differently or veer from the script, you know how to talk about the issues, so your wording isn't necessarily as important. Anyway, so that's the basics for handling a newspaper interview. Of course, we can go in more detail, but if you have your talking points put together, you understand how you want to talk about the issues that matter to you the most, and most importantly, if you can be calm and cool and friendly, your interview will be fine. And if they ask you tough questions, give your answers in a calm, firm way. Oh, and one rule I forgot, always take a deep breath and count to 10 before you speak. Never ever answer a reporter's question without taking a deep breath, counting to 10, repeating the question, and then give your answer, right? How do you feel about guns? I feel the Second Amendment is very important, and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, good luck in your interview. Feel free to leave questions in the comments.